Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
The top of your form, you have a variable name group, it looks like, equal to ng form.
This one right here?
No, next line down, name group, pound name group.
Oh, yes.
So is that just taking the ng control group value as a variable and then assigning it to ng form?
So I'm going to struggle to explain this
I just struggled trying to.
because there is actually some magic going under the hood here. So when, hold on one second, I may be able to connect the dots here. All right. For every form, just like an Angular 1, you get this thing attached to it. In this case, it is ng form. And so now what we're doing is we have this ng form thing floating out here. We need to create a local reference so that we can actually do something with it. And so this is very much like in Angular 1, you'd actually have to give the form a name. Yep. So in this case, we're saying we're going to create this local variable called name group. We're going to attach it to form, which we're then going to attach to our control group. And so what this is doing, by creating this local variable and passing it into our control group, we are now connecting kind of this underlying form directive and the state, or really what we're doing is we're controlling this to this model right here. And so we're simply saying now what we're doing is we're taking this person object and so when you have a form, you have kind of two states. You have the actual values in the form, and then you have the state of the form. So for instance, is it in a valid state? Has it been touched? You know, what are the validators for that? So in Angular 1, you would actually dump out the form group, and you could see that. Right. And so this is essentially the way that they're doing it, and it seems to be kind of a bit of a magical way, but we're simply saying now, because Angular 2 will actually generate these form groups for you on the fly, like implicitly. So like they'll just happen, or you can manually create them. And so you can say, I want to explicitly create these, and the best way to do that is using Form Builder. But we're saying, I want to take this form, and I want to set it as my control group for this, so the actual form directive, and then I want to connect it with my data model.
So if you were to create another group, you could attach it to the same ng form. You would attach it to the same ng form then? So if you have a name group, let's say you had an address group, you would follow the same process and pound address group equals ng form, and now you'd have name group and address group available.
Yep.
Okay.
And so it allows you to actually break this up into kind of groups. So with Angular 1, you kind of had just this one thing.
Yep.
And now what you can do is say, I want to apply specific behavior to these two fields, but for this group, I want to do this. And so it allows you really fine-grained control over, one, how you control each element in your form. And so I think for me, that's where the confusion came in, is like I was used to dealing with pretty much everything on a per form basis. And now they say, no. Like we're not going to give you the form controller. We're actually going to give you basically just a form control, a single one. Then we're going to allow you to group it. And then we're going to give you the form builder to attach additional things like validators. Which, for me is going from, hey, like ng model is completely sufficient. Invariably, I know that's naive because eventually if you're doing non-trivial applications, you run into a situation where it's like, I would like the user not to submit this until they filled this form out into an appropriate state. And so that's where you can do it with control group or even a single control, but I think that form builder, by grouping it together, allows you to actually, with form builder allows you to actually add in the different validations for that.
And then there's one builder per form.
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Yeah, I'm sure you can find an edge case for everything, but yeah. So in that case, you'd have builder group, and then you have name group. You could have address groups.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay.
And so this is really kind of an interesting thing for me to try to explain, like even with Angular 1, it's like, well, what's all this magic happening under the hood? Like, somebody does a form, and all of a sudden, like, they're getting these, these styles applied to their input. Like, what's going on here? And this is kind of the same thing happening with providing this ng form kind of directive that you can point to using a local variable, so hashtag local variable for the win. And then now we can go in and say, hey, what's the state of this? And so that's why, or that's how we're able to, in here, let's just jump back into here. We can modify this. And then you can also see this in action when you need to submit. So for instance here, we're doing the same thing. We're creating a local variable person form. And we're saying, hey, it's this form. And then when we call submit, we're just passing that in. And then down here, we can say, is this valid or not? And so Angular, just like in Angular 1, Angular 2 is providing a mechanism for us to not only know the data model of the form, but the state of the form. And so this is actually, I think, a better way to kind of visualize this. With every form, you have ng form that you can bind to, so you create a local variable, and then you can do something with that. In this case, we're just binding to the submit event, and we're passing it into submit form. And then, in this case, I'm just going to fill this in. So this is a little weird. Angular material is doing something odd, but you can submit, and then we get this. But we can know right away that this thing is not valid. And so how we're doing that is by creating a reference to the form. So we're saying ng form equals this local variable, and then now we can access it and know things about it. Also, you can do just like in Angular 1, .air, and you can attach different CSS styles, etc. Any questions about that?
I think I'm still a little confused on this notion of name group that you
Okay.
have in your, not that one in the editor. Go back to
Yes.
WebStorm.
It's in here somewhere.
Yeah, so it's like, you've got a local variable you just called name group,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, is that sort of arbitrary compared to the one that you've got down in your builder?
So name group is completely arbitrary.
Okay. And then the one that's next to it for the control group?
So,
Is that referring to the one next to it or the one down below?
so what I'm doing here is I'm saying this control group
Mm-hmm.
equals this name group.
Okay,
here.
all right.
So what you're having to do, let me see if I can find this in the documentation where they talk about this. I had to read this a few times. Hold on. So in the docs here, you can see real quick, again, just a variation of what we saw earlier. Let me just. So they're saying they're creating a local variable f, so that's totally variable, and they're saying when we submit this, just pass this in.
So I noticed you're doing it that way in your example, your web-based example, and then in your IDE you're doing it that ng form control in bracket equals person form or something like that. But those are the one and the same.
Let's see here.
So there, NG form model equals person form.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you go to your example in your browser,
Okay. Up here?
no,
Or the other one?
other one. There you go, pound person form, NG form. So I'm assuming those are one and the same?
Yeah.
Or are those
Well, so this is just
the
a local
same?
variable.
Okay.
Well, and so you can do this as many times as you want. I don't know, this is, I may have jumped the tracks when I was putting this together. So here you can see that we're doing, like, this is happening in a few places. Just, I would ignore that. You only need to do this once to have access to the entire thing. So I will update this to be less confusing.